starting our tour of the smallest towns in Arkansas here in Tinsman, Arkansas. Interesting little town to get started with. Basically grew up around the railroad, and in the late 1800s and then early 1900s it was incorporated, post office, all that, and grew to a town of over 200, near 250 people. And it's a place with a lot of tall trees that you'll notice as you're driving around town. So there was a sawmill here, and then the railroad closed eventually, and with that, that was the kind of death knell for growth, and it was declining already, and it's continued to decline to the population of 50 today. And going around, it's an interesting town to explore. It's gorgeous around here. The tall trees kind of around the roads, kind of driving back through some of the back roads of the downtown area. You have tall trees, you see a few houses where people are living, and then you see a lot of abandoned houses and places. Right here, kind of in the middle of the town, there's some houses, and there's a fire department, nice water tower. You don't see many water towers in towns this small. So kind of interesting drive around, and definitely some probably places where people want to live and not be bothered. So I drove around a little bit so you don't have to. Where the railroad is, you can see the growth of nature around it. Pretty interesting to see that. So but I'll give you a little bird's eye view with the drone, and also show you some of the other places here around Tinsman. Wiederkehr is a town that is solely here because of the wine industry here in Arkansas, and it was named this because in 1880 a Johann Wiederkehr moved here from Switzerland with his wife and started growing grapes to produce wine for the local coal miners in this area. And it became very popular, and then he passed the business kind of down through his family, and eventually in the 1970s they decided to incorporate the town, help with taxes and things like that, and they had unanimous consent from all the people that lived here, and basically the only thing that's here is the things that are about the winery, and then there's an RV park as well. Driving around is interesting. Actually did go down some back roads too, so you kind of see where some people live. But there's some really cool old buildings here in the village. So not a typical town, but one of the smallest in Arkansas. I'm standing here at the St. Paul Church just outside Ozan, Arkansas. It's just down the road just a bit. There's a St. Paul and a St. Peter church that are about a mile or so from Ozan, different directions. And the reason I'm standing here is because there were a lot of early churches in this area. This was a pretty old settlement. Arkansas had statehood in 1836, and post office was established near here in 1852. It was a small town, and railroad came through, and then the timber industry was huge in this area. And Ozan didn't grow like some of the other towns in this area. It kind of remained fairly small, but there was a Ozan lumber company that I'm assuming got their name from this town, and it's about a third of the size of its peak. So 150 or so was the highest population in census surveys since they started doing those, and now we're about a third of that. What's left is a couple old buildings. There's the railroad right there, so you can kind of see where town used to be, and the post office. There's a fire department, and just kind of a variety of houses along a pretty busy road. But it's definitely very green, a lot of trees, beautiful area of Arkansas. Whelen Springs was a lumber town. Actually, it was a really successful one. Back as early as the 1880s, that's kind of how this area got settled. And there were multiple sawmills that were built throughout about the first 40 years of its existence. And looked like it was going to be kind of full steam ahead with the growth of the town. And then after the World Wars, things started to get smaller, and the mills started closing one at a time, and the population just dwindled and dwindled down to what it is today. Almost half of what it was 10 years ago. What's left is there's a post office, a couple of older buildings, a city hall, kind of fire department that's all one kind of little area right there in the middle of town. But there's looks like a fairly active community of people around, moving around. Not a ton of abandoned places, just a small community left. Blue Eye, Arkansas is very unique. Even though it has 46 people, that makes it unique. But one of the things that makes it even more unique is that Blue Eye is half in Arkansas and half in Missouri. But I am walking down State Line Road right now. So behind me, as you can see, is Missouri on my left, Arkansas on my right. So Blue Eye is like I said, very unique in that it's in two different states, and so I think it has two different towns. It has two different populations. You know, on this list, these towns are all small. This one's bigger because there's like 200 people total, but technically the Arkansas side is only 46. So that's why it's on this list here. And you know, the Missouri side has been kind of the older side of Blue Eye, and the bigger side, it was started in 1870. The Arkansas side, even though it wasn't incorporated until 1932, it did have a school before that, and it had this square. The square of the town is in Arkansas. Most of anything that is I guess you could say as a business is on the Missouri side of Blue Eye. You know, the population's 46. It's actually gotten bigger in the last couple census surveys. It's the biggest it's been since 1970. So I wonder if people from Missouri Blue Eye move over to Arkansas Blue Eye. I don't know. Corinth is different than all the other towns on this list for a couple reasons. So it was started in the 1960s as an official town because the people that lived here didn't want to have their deal with the taxes of encroaching towns from nearby. There's actually two towns that kind of sandwich Corinth. You have Danville and you have Belleville, and as they were getting bigger, it was encroaching upon the people that lived here, and so in the 1960s they decided to incorporate as a town to avoid those taxes. And it's been a small town community, if you call it that, because as you drive around, I could hardly find anything. This old church behind me is the only old thing that I could find. I read that there was maybe a school here a long time ago. It would have been a rural school because they put schools every few miles around, but I don't see any sign of that. And all I do is, all I've found is as I drive around the dirt and gravel roads is find houses, and most of them are farms, or they're nice houses, a couple of abandoned houses, but I don't see any kind of like a city hall or a administrative building. I'm assuming maybe it's on one of the farmers' property. There's, it's interesting when you find these kind of places. I've been to places kind of like this in Texas and Missouri, where the people kind of incorporate their own land for different reasons, whether it be taxes or liquor license laws. There's an Ascension church that's in town near kind of the main road that you would get off to come into Corinth. Birdsong, Arkansas is a bit of a fascinating little town. Only 32 people, but there is some history here. I'm currently sitting in the Birdsong Park. There's actually 2 parks in Birdsong. That's got to be like most parks per capita. There's a fun park, and then there's the senior citizen park. And I'm in the senior citizen park, obviously, because I'm rapidly approaching status. But this was all swampland at one time, and the Mississippi River is not far from here. There's a lot of water, and that's why it was swampland. And it was finally made good for farming, and they had a lot of sharecroppers in this area. And then in 1935, this place gained national recognition, and it was due to the plight of the sharecroppers in this area. This is a 100% African American community, 32 out of 32. When it was incorporated in 1984, it was bigger. It was around 100, and then has gotten smaller and smaller. Definitely not a place where you're going to find a lot of young people. So I imagine this will continue to dwindle, this town. But when you get here and you check things out, there's some things to see. There's some older buildings. There's a little tiny downtown area where there's a city hall, there's a volunteer fire department, there's a church, and like I said, there's a couple of parks for everyone's enjoyment. So you could bring your kids. They look like they just had a reunion of some sort not too long ago. I found some old things showing pictures in the fun park. Beautiful area and very quiet, appropriately named Birdsong, because that's about all you can hear is the wind and the songs of the birds. McNab was started, kind of the first people that settled here, that owned some farms, were people that there was a road that went to Fulton, which was a couple miles from here, and some people kind of made a path up to here and ended up settling some of this land. But not until the railroad came through around the turn of the 20th century did really a town start here. So there was a farmer with the last name McNab, and the railroad depot was put basically on his farm, and that's how the town of McNab was named. Once that happened, a post office was put here in the early 1900s, and a town built up, and there were stores and businesses and a normal small town, and the population was pretty solid until the usefulness of the railroad was not needed anymore, and when that happened, people started moving away, and the town has gotten smaller and smaller. The population has kind of gone up and down in recent census surveys. So it's on here in 2020. Wouldn't have been probably in 2010. Maybe was previous to that. So kind of an interesting fluctuation. There's not a whole lot left. I'm in the city park, and there's a couple old buildings. There's the town hall and a community center. You can go down by the railroad, and there's another building or two down there. Other than that, just a community of houses. Not a lot of old abandoned stuff from the early days of the town. Getting down there pretty small with the population 26 here at Gilbert. Although 26 people, it's definitely not an abandoned place. But Gilbert started as a railroad town, and it was not an easy place to get the railroad through because it's hilly and definitely hard to lay tracks to get through here, but they did, and it started to grow. Town started growing. They had some sawmills, they had the railroad, they had a hotel, they had kind of everything a normal town has, and the population was over 100. Not huge, but for a couple decades. And then the logging industry stopped, and the railroad was stopped coming through here, ended up pulling up the tracks, and so it started to diminish. And it's been pretty small for a long time, since maybe 70, 80 years ago. It's been pretty small, and but it is right here by the Buffalo River, so it's kind of a hub for recreational activities. So you see a lot of people around here. So it has newer buildings, has a few older buildings. In 2020, Jerome was a town. Now it's not. And I'm using the census figures from 2020. Every 10 years is when the United States redoes the official census. And so the city council of Jerome decided they'd gotten small enough, and they decided to dissolve the town, and now it's not officially a town. But since I'm going by the 2020 census, it's still on this list. But obviously, the next time I would do something like this, or a current list of incorporated towns that wouldn't be on it, hard to figure out which way to do it, because they come out with estimated census tallies every year, and that's just what it is. It's estimated. Jerome has had a very interesting history for a number of reasons. If we go back to the beginning, there was a sawmill and a railroad here, and the railroad is actually still here. There's a sawmill, and it brought in a lot of jobs, and the population swelled, and the first official population was almost 400 people that lived here. And then when you look at the figures, it drops off dramatically. And in like 1927, the sawmill burned, and they went out of business. And so, this became almost a ghost town. And the land was sold to the government, and they ended up moving some kind of out of work, farming families here to help shelter them, I guess, at that time during the Great Depression. But then World War II came along, and you can see behind me, we are at the Jerome Relocation Center Monument, and this is just actually down the road, not far from the actual town of Jerome. Jerome was one of the, I think, about 10 places in the United States where Japanese Americans were relocated during World War II, during the kind of hysteria that was happening at that time, and 8,000 Japanese Americans were sheltered here, and it's called a Japanese internment camp, and that was right here in Jerome, Arkansas. That was from 1942 to 1944, and after they were released, they did house some German prisoner of wars as well here. But then the population has just kind of been small. There are some things to see, though. There is a business working there by the railroad, and on the other side of the railroad, there's some old buildings. There's a school. There's a church. So we'll show you around, give you an idea of what the town of Jerome looks like today. Well, actually, what the town of Jerome was, now the unincorporated community of Jerome. Welcome to the smallest town in Arkansas, Victoria, with a population of 20. And, this is kind of a unique story in a lot of ways. The way this area got organized was that there was a guy named Robert Wilson, and he had this kind of idea to buy up a bunch of land that wasn't being used. It was kind of like swampland, and he bought up tens of thousands of acres. And he created little towns, Victoria, one of them, in this county, and as like big, giant plantations. And Victoria was actually his sister, and then he had a daughter who he also named Victoria, and she married a guy with the last name of Wesson, Wesson, and I'm sitting here in front of this Wesson Farms building, which is actually the post office. I'm assuming it's like a city hall as well, looking inside. And if Wesson sounds familiar, It's because he was an heir to the firearm dealer Smith & Wesson. So I just got kicked out of Victoria. I was sitting there in front of the administrative building, and the lady came up and said this was privately owned and not allowed to be here. Although, I mean, I can be on the road, you can drive through, but I'm not allowed to, I guess, get out and explore. So I'll stay on the road and take some pictures and videos. But getting back to finishing the story about Victoria, so Smith & Wesson, you know, the heir Wesson, married the daughter of Robert Wilson, and so that's then they started Wesson Farms, and this is what Wesson, you know, what this is here now. They decided to incorporate. The town decided to incorporate in 1966, and had a couple hundred people, and has dwindled quite a bit, down to 20, obviously. So almost a ghost town, but a very unique ghost town. There are a lot of houses that are nice. Obviously, this is, you know, privately owned, so these places are going to be nice. This isn't a regular town that has gotten small into nothing. So yeah, well, let me show you a little bit of what I can of Victoria before I get kicked out again. So that's the list. What did you think of the 10 smallest towns of Arkansas? What was your favorite? Was it one of the old towns that has kind of crumbled, or was it something like Victoria here at the end that apparently didn't want me to be around? I don't know. I thought it was interesting. As I do more of these states, you know, you just learn more and more about history of why these towns are the size they are, maybe on purpose or you know, definitely not on purpose for some of the people who had dreams of bigger things. So, but Arkansas is a very interesting state. I've really enjoyed exploring Arkansas. Corinth, Alabama. Alabama. Haha, I'm in Arkansas. Victoria. I need to get that guy. And little thunder in McNab. We'll wait that out.